Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kimberly Weisul, and I'm an editor-at-large at Inc. I'll be your moderator for today's National Small Business Town Hall, the third in a series of weekly town halls designed to help business owners get through the current coronavirus crisis. At Inc., we are always looking for ways to support entrepreneurs, and one way we've been doing that is with our ongoing coverage of the stimulus package and this crisis and what it means for business owners. I'm so pleased that today we're partnering with another champion of small business, the U.S. Chambers of Commerce. I'll be joined by Neil Bradley, the Executive Vice President and Chief Policy Officer for the Chamber. We'll also be taking your questions, and I'll be introducing a panel of experts to help answer them. One thing you should know is that we typically get many questions for these events, for which we are grateful and happy to help. We also have a moderator working behind the scenes to make sure that the questions that are most commonly asked are the ones that get asked of our panelists. So even if we don't get to your particular question, we really do hope that we'll be able to provide you with some direct advice that you will find helpful in running your business and getting it through this ridiculously difficult time. For those of you who are not familiar with Neil Bradley, he has over 2 decades of experience working directly with high-level policymakers. At the Chamber, as the Executive Vice President and Chief Policy Officer, he is responsible for aligning the Chamber's overall policy priorities and advocacy efforts. Welcome, Neil.
I was rusty. I forgot to hit unmute. Kimberly, it's great to be with you again.
Thank you. It's great to have you with us as well. You've been such a great help to these business owners the past few weeks. I'd like to just start with the Paycheck Protection Program. I know we've discussed it here before, but for folks who may be coming to this new, can you just give us like 2 or 3 sentences on what this program is before we get into the details?
Sure. This is the marquee program enacted by Congress 2 weeks ago for small businesses. It's $350 billion in loans that's based on your payroll amounts as a small business, to basically 2.5 months worth of your average payroll. And this is the real benefit of the program. If you get a loan and you use it to pay your payroll and a few other related expenses, you can ultimately have that loan forgiven. And so to date, 250,000 small businesses have applied for and are in the process of receiving one of those paycheck protection loans.
That's excellent. Thank you. Now, about those 250,000 small businesses, most of them did not have an easy time. Last Friday was the first day for many businesses to apply. Today is the first day for 1099 workers and independent contractors to apply for this program. We expected to have more to go on from the government now about how this would happen. What are we expecting they're going to find when they try to apply? Is today going to look like last Friday?
I don't know if it's exactly going to look like last Friday. Lending institutions have a week under their belt figuring this out and how to process it. We were hoping for more guidance from the SBA and the Treasury Department for independent contractors. We were hoping for a form that could be specific to independent contractors. At the moment, it looks like you're supposed to use the form that small business employers used, except you would just substitute your income as an independent contractor for the average monthly payroll that you input as a small employer. We know that there's a lot of independent contractors in America. There are actually 23 million Americans that drew income in 2016 as independent contractors. Not all of them are going to apply, but even if just a portion of them do, that's a tremendous new volume coming into the system.
So what sort of documentation should they have ready, right? They're not going to have the payroll records that a larger business would have. So what should they have ready to go in order to participate in this?
Yeah, so your first stop should be any tax forms that you might have, particularly those 1099s that you received from the companies that you are doing work for. That's a great place to start. Compile those 1099s. If you don't have those handy, other tax documents where you can document that income. If you don't have that, you're going to want to be looking for bank records, but they're really looking for some type of official documentation. Tax records are by far the best.
Okay, so one of the things about this paycheck protection loan is that the amount you're eligible for depends on how much you're spending on payroll. So how is an independent contractor supposed to make that leap from what their income was on those 1099s to the amount they actually could count as payroll, independent of other expenses?
That's a great question. This is one of the things we're really hoping to get guidance on. I know you and I were up late last night, hitting refresh, hoping that it would show up, right? It didn't. But so we're left to go back to the statute. And what the statute says is that independent contractors, those sole proprietors, they're eligible up to $100,000 in annual income, except that has to be then prorated. So I think the simple way to think about it is that you calculate all your 1099 or sole proprietor income up for 2019, and then you're going to divide that by 12 to get an average monthly amount, and then times 2.5. That's the way the current application reads, and until we get more guidance or a different application form for independent contractors, that seems to be the best way to go.
So that's great to know. I just want to ask for a clarification, though, on that 2.5 months of payroll, because I think we were talking about this last night. It looked like possibly the 1099s could be eligible for more than 2.5. Do you think that's possibly true?
Well, they wrote this statute pretty quickly, and they kind of used some terms that referred back to the terms for the covered period, which is longer than 2.5 months. But so we looked at that, and it kind of looked like that might be the case. But then when we went to the regulation, the interim final regulation, it seems to be that they're conforming that, and it's still going to be that 2.5. Again, it sure would be nice to get final guidance on this, but I think the safe bet is that it looks like what you do for small businesses that are employers, and it's the 2.5.
Okay, great. That's excellent. So a number of banks last Friday were saying that they were only, for the time being, going to be taking applications from customers that already had some sort of business relationship with them, preferably that they had some kind of debt. A lot of independent, self-employed might not have that kind of relationship with a bank. So where should they go to file their application? Where are they going to have the best shot?
Yeah, and first, let me clarify why banks decide to do that. One of the requirements that were on financial institutions, banks who make these loans, is they still have to comply with federal laws like Know Your Customer and anti-money laundering. And so they're on the hook for legally verifying that you are who you say you are, and you're not laundering money for some cartel. So that's why they were doing that. They're quickly now moving to be able to process new customers. But in addition, earlier this week, the administration invited Fintech companies, online lenders, to participate in this program. We expect in the coming days that those Fintech, we already know Fintechs who have applied, that they'll get approved and that they will start making loans. That will be a great resource for independent contractors in particular, because remember, 2.5 months, average 100,000, you're only talking about a little less than 21,000 maximum loan amount.
And so do you think then that those fintech players will be able to handle the volume we expect to see better than the banks have been able to? Because it's not just a bank problem, right? This goes all the way back to the SBA.
Yeah, so remember, when you fill out an application, that's just the first step in the process, right? And so whether it's a traditional bank or a fintech leader, they have to turn around and then do another application unique to you that they send to the SBA, and then the SBA has to generate a unique loan number for you, and then that has to come back even before you can get the funds. So there are a couple other bottlenecks in the process here after you apply. I think everyone is getting faster and faster. We're just not where we want to be yet in terms of processing speed.
I think also part of the reason there was such a crush last Friday is because there's a perception that this is essentially a race and the money's going to run out. And we could talk about the EIDL program where that seems to basically have happened. What are the prospects for money for the PPP program?
So here's some good news. Earlier this week, the administration requested another $250 billion for the PPP program. Congressional leaders, both Republicans and Democrats, have said that they are committed to providing those additional monies. They're having a little bit of dispute between Republicans and Democrats about what to attach to that additional 250. But we're pretty confident that at the end of the day, and before the PPP money runs out, that Congress will replenish that, and there's not going to be this risk of a small business owner being left behind with respect to and being left without the ability to get a loan under the PPP program.
Right. So it's really not the amount, but the speed that is the bigger issue, because a lot of these businesses need the money like yesterday, basically.
Yeah, that's right. And remember, even at that 250,000 borrowers I mentioned earlier, we're at about 100 billion. So we haven't even quite done a full third of the amount that's available under PPP. So we have a few days here.
So we've spoken to a number of business owners that have applied to multiple institutions for one of these loans, mostly out of panic, right? You put in an application, you maybe get an auto reply saying we'll get back to you, but you know the bank is swamped. So they're also worried now in retrospect, is that going to trigger a fraud alert if I have 3 applications in at 3 different places for the same money? What's the best thing to do?
Well, I think you're right to be concerned about that. We don't know in the back end bowels of the processing at SBA how quickly they're checking that or how automated the system is to check something like that. I think the best advice we could give them, it's not legal advice, but remember, if you read that form that you signed, you committed that you would receive no more than 1 PPP loan. So whatever you do, make sure that you don't receive, i.e. sign the final paperwork for more than 1 loan, because you're definitely in trouble then. This is a great question. If you've done that, you might want to check in with your lenders and figure out and just make them aware of that so that they know that if something gets flagged on the back end at the SBA, exactly why and how to help you resolve it.
Another thing that we've been hearing of is some business owners being offered a smaller amount by their bank. So like 1.5 months of payroll instead of 2.5. Since you can only get one of these, would you advise, and this may also be a question for the panel, that people take that 1.5 months, or should they turn it down and try to get the full amount somewhere else?
Well, all I can tell you is what I would do if that was in my position and I knew I needed the 2.5 months, I would find a lender at the 2.5 months.
Okay, good. If what you would do, I think, is a very informed decision. So thank you. We should talk briefly about the EIDL program, right? The Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. There have been a number of changes to that since it was announced. I think last week we were saying that business owners could get $10,000 off the top of it, an advance essentially. Now they're saying $1,000 per employee up to $10,000. Is it worth people applying to this? Because we're also hearing it's basically out of money.
So they did run into a problem here. And this is the program that you go through the SBA website to apply. The website crashed a number of times. There were problems with the keeping the loans tracked. Well, what it turns out is they got everything back up and running. They are completely oversubscribed. And so last night they began telling applicants for the loan that while the maximum loan amount by statute's $2 million, and maybe you were trying to get 200,000, the most you might be able to get is a loan for 15,000 until Congress replenishes this money. This is one that snuck up on them in all honesty. And now we're racing at the U.S. Chamber to get Congress to put more money into that program. Because remember, this program is really important if you have non-payroll operating costs. PPP is really targeted to those payroll costs. The EIDL loans are really helpful if you have costs outside of that, of being able to borrow fairly low interest rate and pay it back over a long period. So we got to get that fixed. You should be mindful of it. I would want to make sure I know that it got fixed as I'm thinking about whether to apply for that or not.
Right. You mentioned earlier that Congress is looking at another maybe $250 billion for the Paycheck protection loans. One of the pieces of that may or may not happen is that a large portion of that, maybe $125 billion, would be for women and minorities. Is that potentially going to be helpful to those groups? Because a lot of people who would fall in those categories might not be certified, or is this going to be another hoop that business owners have to jump through?
Well, it's unclear. We'll have to see what Congress looks like next. I'll tell you what we're focused on. We do want to make sure that we get to underserved, underbanked communities to make sure that they understand that they're a small business that are eligible for this. I know lots of other folks who are helping to try to do that. What we're stressing to members of Congress is don't create more hoops that make it harder for everyone to get credit. To get access to this at a moment in which we have such demand and such backlog. Let us and folks like Inc. do what we do, which is get out to these communities and make sure that they know that they should be applying and taking advantage of these programs.
Another thing that we got some clarification on last week were these affiliation rules, which we don't need to go into depth, but they basically determine if you have equity investors, are you eligible? And it looks like the answer for many companies can be yes, if they make certain changes, but it looks like maybe it's tougher for private equity companies. Or private equity backed companies. Can you talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, that's right. So this is the rules in which you count up similarly affiliated companies, the head count to find out if they qualify. And sadly, once you add up a bunch of different small businesses, you can be over the size limit. They made some changes that would appear to help some investors, as you mentioned, venture capital. But if you generally have more of a majority share or common control, there's still a roadblock here. We're working at the U.S. Chamber along with others who want to see this fixed to encourage the administration to make some changes here because, irrespective of your ownership structure, these independent businesses do need some help in being able to survive this downturn.
Got it. The other big announcement I think this week was, or one of them was the Main Street Lending Program, right? And that's for businesses with up to 10,000 employees. How do people access this? It seems like this is directly through your bank also.
That's exactly right. So this was an announcement by the Federal Reserve yesterday that they are going to facilitate banks making loans to businesses with fewer than 10,000 employees, which could include small businesses. So there's no undersize limit. So the loans will be a minimum of $1 million. These are loans that will be made by normal banks and financial institutions. But to help those banks and to encourage those banks to make those loans, the Federal Reserve will essentially buy from your bank 95% of that loan. And that's a great incentive for the banks to make these loans. This won't be online for probably about another week in terms of people being able to apply. We have a 5-day comment period, and then obviously banks have to begin making these loans. So you should watch into this. If you're not eligible for the PPP or you're looking for additional assistance beyond the PPP, you can get PPP and this. So you'll just want to begin talking to your bank about how you might be able to take advantage of this.
Great, Neil, thank you so very much. I'm going to introduce our panel now, and we're going to start the Q&A section of the webinar. You're welcome to continue to put questions into the Q&A, and I'll be able to ask them to our panelists. First, I want to go to Sarah Jennings. She is a CPA and director and principal at the accounting firm Maynard Costerisan. She's been helping a lot of business owners through this process. So I want to ask her, what are the most common mistakes that you see business owners making in their applications for Paycheck protection loans? Sarah, thanks for being with us.
Hi, Kimberly. Thanks for having me. At Maynard Costerisan, we absolutely are going through a lot of these PPP applications and trying to help our clients. And then I kind of went through the top 5 mistakes or errors that we're seeing. And some of them, quite honestly, because things were changing so much over the last week, weren't necessarily errors on the part of the applicant. It's because reports were changing. So one of the things that we see, kind of the top one, is the incorrect amount for the payroll cost. So you have to use the gross payroll. So that includes commissions, it includes cash tips, it includes a whole host of things. What it doesn't include is employer portions of the employer FICA and federal taxes. So we saw a lot of payroll companies trying to be proactive in making bunch reports for clients to go in and just print a package to be able to submit with their application. But as there was additional clarifications from Saturday even through Tuesday, I think, those package number changes. So we saw a lot of people reprinting. Another thing that we saw was including subcontractors and independent contractors. And again, as was already discussed, that changed. So that's now a separate application. One of the other things that we looked at was people not capping over $100,000. So those individuals that incur or had compensation over $100,000, you can only include that first $100,000, not anything in excess of that.
Excellent. Thank you so very much for that. That's great advice. I believe Tanya Mata of the Cal Asian Chamber of Commerce is with us. Hello, Tanya.
Hi, good morning, Kimberly.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us. I would like to know, are you seeing some of the business owners that you work with actually getting these loans approved and funded? And if so, what are they doing differently from everybody else?
We have to circle back with all of the people. What we're doing right now is we have a call center. We've got about 6 of our full-time employees that are working with, I think right now we have about 1,300 clients that we've been calling and talking to, and we've been providing assistance with the packaging for the PPP and also assisting them through the application for EIDL. Our next movement after this will be to follow up with all of our clients to find out what it is that they're actually receiving, what is the amount that they're receiving, how quickly did they receive it, so that we'll have all of that documentation to see what our efforts have produced. But as of this time, our center of folks that are here, and they're my personal heroes because they've come in regardless of what is going on in the community because they are so dedicated to helping our small businesses. We are still working through our list of folks, and we will be circling back within the next few weeks to find out what type of awards that people are seeing.
Well, thank you very much. That's amazing that you're helping that number of business owners with such a small staff. So big plaudits to everyone. Thank you. Bridget Weston is the acting CEO of the SCORE Association. Who are you recommending that 1099s and other sort of self-employed people should be in touch with as they prepare to apply for a loan?
Sure. As has been said, talk to your local banker, but there are other things that you can do in order to make sure you are as prepared as possible when you do go to apply for that loan. First is to talk to your landlord or any other business resources that you owe regular payments to. Don't wait for them to call you. Be proactive, explain your circumstances, and make sure they know what you're doing in order to navigate this crisis. You'll also want to reach out to your accountant or CPA, get information or guidance on any possible business deductions that you may be able to take on your tax returns for next year. The other person you'll want to speak with is your insurance professional. Talk to them, see what your insurance policy does cover in terms of business interruption or extra expense coverage. And finally, reach out to a SCORE mentor or an SBA resource partner with SBDCs or women's business centers. We are staying up to date, making sure that we know the ins and outs as best as we can, and we can help you navigate this throughout this crisis and beyond.
Great, thank you very much. I want to turn now to Keith Hall. He is the president and CEO of the National Association of the Self-Employed. Keith, we do not have the guidance that we were hoping for in terms of how self-employed people can best think about not just their own paychecks, but getting these loans forgiven. What sort of advice are you giving to your members about how to think about forgiveness on the back end of these loans?
Well, obviously today is the day that independent contractors can start the application process. As Neil mentioned earlier, there are 23 million self-employed businesses out there that generated income last year. So this is a big population of small business owners. So our first piece of advice, and this may be your first question out there, and that is you do qualify, period. Okay, it's going to be the very rare situation that you as a self-employed business owner don't qualify for the PPP program. So forget that and move on, because if you have a business and you made money, you need to have made money in it, but if you have a business, you qualify. So that brings us to the second thing, which is most important of all. So much detail, so much confusion, as you've already heard, but the one thing you need to do today is start the application process. Now, whether you go to your local bank, we talk about these online Fintech programs, there's lots of places to get help, But again, there are going to be literally millions of businesses standing in line going through this application process. So the quicker you start, the better you're going to be. So go ahead and get that application in. And the last thing, just to kind of touch on what Neil mentioned before, the big question we get is, what information do I need? What piece of paper do I need? Because I don't have payroll records, I don't have ADP or Paycheck. So the key document from your tax return is your Schedule C. That is where the profit and loss from your business is recorded. The very bottom line of that, which is all of your revenue minus expenses, is your net earnings from self-employment. And for the PPP program, your payroll is defined as your net earnings from self-employment. If you're a new business, it's a great idea to go to irs.gov, download a Schedule C, and you can use that to kind of fill in what you expect your earnings to be, where your earnings have been for the first couple of months, estimate what your expenses would be, and that will give you the number to complete your application.
Great. That is excellent. Thank you very much for that advice. I think a lot of people have been struggling with how to figure that out. I'm going to ask actually our first audience question to you, Keith, if you would hang on for a minute there. You said, if you have a business, yes, you can apply for the PPP. And our question is, as the solo entrepreneur, can I apply for unemployment and EIDL? What's their status on those two programs?
Well, you certainly can. And again, back to my second piece of advice, the great news is to apply. Now, what we have heard, and similar to this kind of a common thread here, there's been a lot of confusion at the state level, because as an independent contractor in many states, you are not eligible for unemployment. But now through this process from a federal mandate, if you will, not to use the word of art, but from a federal standpoint, you now are eligible. We've heard a number of stories of people contacting their local unemployment agency and have been told they're not eligible. They'll call another person the next day and find out that they are eligible. So this is one of those things. Again, there are 23 million small businesses out there. This is a tremendous response. Whether you're, a left-leaning politician or a right-leaning politician, this is one of those unique environments that everyone does indeed seem to be pulling together, and there are resources available. So I think the thing we need probably more than anything else, and we as small business owners this may be our shortcoming, but we need to be patient. Review your application, keep talking to your local office. If you can, as you've heard several times, you can find a local banker. But rather than an online application process, you're probably going to be ahead of the game and have someone that's actually working on your specific situation.
Great. Thank you very much, Keith. I appreciate it. Our next question is for Sarah Jennings. This is a question that we've had a lot about partnerships, and I don't know if there's a perfect answer yet, but if you could help us out with what you know, that would be awesome. Can we get clarification on the PPP program for partners in a partnership? Our income is reported on a K-1 and we don't have traditional payroll. What should those people do?
Right, so there are a couple pieces to that. So if you get a K-1 and you have guaranteed payments within that partnership, the partnership can file the PPP for that program and include any guaranteed payments, which is box 4 of your K-1. They also can include in the PPP loan application the self-employment income, which is also included on that K-1. So I think you're absolutely right. Initially, I think people thought that nothing on the K-1 was included and they were kind of on their own. Those two pieces you can use, and then it's part of that payroll calculation, averaging out by month, multiplying it by 2.5 so that you can get the maximum loan amount.
Great, thank you. I know that's of concern to a lot of business owners. This is a question that has 82 likes. I know that Neil knows a ton about this. Why are the banks, both big and small, having so much trouble getting these loan applications processed? Neil, do you want to give a quick briefer on that?
Well, of course, yes. And I think Keith said it right. It's hard to be patient in this moment, but remember, in a week, they've gotten 250,000 applications that they have to process. And like everyone else, they have people who are having to work from home and work remotely and figure this out. And they got the rules that the banks were supposed to follow. They got it at like 4 in the morning, and they were supposed to start processing loans when they opened that day. And so, it is frustrating, and I appreciate people's frustration, but it is also a Herculean effort that's being undertaken here to move an unprecedented amount of money through an unprecedented number of institutions to an unprecedented number of small businesses. And so I think it's going to get faster and faster as we go, but be patient, hang on, it is working.
Yeah, I think that the numbers that I had seen was something like the SBA generally processes, $20-odd billion worth of guarantees in a good year, right? I think last year was like 29 billion, and now we're looking at 349 billion in a couple of months. So it's
a couple months, couple weeks.
Scale is crazy. Yeah, right. It's been backed up to a couple of weeks.
Yeah, we're going to process that in a couple of weeks, and we're going to take all the small businesses that are employers, and today we're also expanding that out to 23 million other Americans. I mean, this is, the government that runs the Postal Service and and the DMVs can consider the fact that what they're doing today is lightning speed for them. And thankfully they have good partners, not just in the big national banks, but regional banks, local banks, credit unions who are really stepping up here. I've talked to a number of these lending institutions. They brought people and had them working all night processing people's loan applications so that they could get them in. And now they have to wait for someone in Washington to turn that around and get them a loan number.
I think our next question is, and thank you, Neil. Our next question is sort of more of a strategy question for Tanya and Bridget, and I'd love for them to be able to weigh in on it. I think I'm going to go to Bridget first just because I can see her, but then to Tanya. And the question is, how are we to think about these programs since they are at the root of it debt? If the business does not support an online presence, would adding debt that may not lead to revenue be a good approach? How can they think about adding debt at this time?
Sure, that's a great question, and that's something a lot of our SCORE mentors are helping their small businesses navigate. There are pros and cons to debt, and it's why we need to look at the financial projections, what expenses you can cut in order to make sure you're paying the minimal things that you need to keep your business sustainable. We also want to encourage businesses to look at other ways to keep their business open, keeping in touch with your clients and looking at online business. In terms of debt, if it is going to help you keep your business and your doors open for the short term, then we want you to stay in business for the life of your business, and we will help you find the best ways in order to leverage that loan to make sure that your business stays open and can pay it back.
Great, thank you. Tanya, how can this business owner think about debt at this time?
Well, I can tell you that a lot of the clients that I serve are construction clients, and they seem to be in perpetual debt, building America, building our roads, building everything that we need, and they seem to be in perpetual debt, waiting to get paid, 60, 90, 120 days. So I think for my construction clients, it is just their way of life, is being able to wait for the funding to come through after they've already provided the services. I think each small business owner, you are the captain of your ship, you are your CEO, you are the president. You make the decisions, you're an entrepreneur, some of the fastest moving thinking people on the planet. And I think that what the conversation needs to turn to in these unprecedented times is, yes, there's help out here. We've got our federal government trying to step up to it, coming up with something in 5 days, and there's a lot of unanswered questions. However, it is also, what are we doing to ensure that if we do take on debt, that we'll be able to emerge out of this debt later as successful businesses. So I think what we are wanting to do with our conversation with our small businesses is, I can't speak to everybody through email and sending everything out. So what we've done is we've created a hashtag, I am small business -the movement. And it doesn't belong to our chamber, it belongs to the United States. Our businesses, get on there. Let's start talking. Let's start talking about strategies that we are using and employing, not just in America, but other businesses across, around the world. What are people doing? What are we seeing? What can we start using and employing and finding resources to ensure that if we are taking on the debt, that we have a plan to move forward? And what Bridget talked about is, it's important for them to connect with our chambers of commerces, all of the technical assistance in your state, in your communities, but together we can fix this. We've seen it happen. I mean, it is happening.
Excellent. I hope that you are right. I think we all do. Next question, I think is for you, Neil. We had talked about how the EIDL loan is kind of in limbo. This person would love some guidance on expectations. It says, we applied for an EIDL loan last Tuesday and checked the box for receiving the $10,000 grant. Haven't seen anything yet. What should we expect from here? What should they? Because the guidelines changed in between the time that they applied and where they heard anything.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I wish we had better answers for you. We know, just based on the number of small businesses that we talk to at the U.S. Chamber and through our Federation of State and Local Chambers, the businesses were, routinely telling us that it was about 10 days before they were hearing on some of their EIDL applications. And interestingly, earlier it had been a shorter duration, and as time had gotten on, it kept getting longer, and now the average is about 10 days. I think you're going to want to hold tight to that. We are pushing Congress very hard at the U.S. Chamber to add money back. If money is added back into that system, there's no reason that the SBA can't increase those loan amounts back up to what the statute requires and increase the $10,000 grant backup. As you remarked earlier, they'd cut it to $1,000 per employee. There's no reason that that can't go back up, but that won't happen until we get Congress to pass and the president to sign that additional funding. So I would just keep an eye on that. We'll have updates on that at uschamber.com as well.
Great, thank you very much. Sarah, I think this is a question for you, and maybe Keith, you can hop in as well. This is from a 1099 who says that obviously their 1099 forms are based upon their sales. So what happens if I don't match the sales I put in to the application for the Paycheck Protection Program for those 8 weeks? What if going further, I don't have a good year? What does that mean, Sarah? How do they think about it?
I think that we actually don't have a ton of clarity on what that means, because I think that we will, over the next 2 months, next 8 weeks, we're going to really get clarity, especially for sole proprietors and independent contractors, what that forgiveness calculation looks like. Earlier in the session, there was a little bit of clarity on what the payroll protection or Paycheck Protection Program loan max would be used calculating. But I've actually talked to some bankers just this morning, and they said they didn't even have clarity for the applications that they've received in. So they didn't know if it was using the Schedule C or the net amount, or if it was just the 1099 gross amounts and how that was going to be calculated. So I think, unfortunately, from my perspective, I think there's still a lot of things that are unclear on the forgiveness side.
Okay, I feel like for business owners, it's becoming like an existential test here.
Yeah.
Keith, can you add anything about what if you're a 1099? You think you can apply for a good quote unquote payroll amount, but you're worried about your business not doing well going forward later this year?
Well, and I think this is, I hate using the word logic and legislation in the same sentence necessarily, but I think long term there's a practical implication here, and that is the definition of payroll as it relates to a company that has, say, 10 employees. It's easy to prove that they use the money for payroll. So there is no standard that says that company has to grow in revenue or do better than they did before. All they have to prove or to show is that they continued making their payroll payments. So now back to the definition for a 1099 independent contractor, your payroll is your net earnings from self-employment. So once you have demonstrated, in my opinion, once you've demonstrated that you have, say, $100,000 in net earnings from self-employment, you get a PP loan for $15,000. By definition, that $15,000 is indeed used for payroll because it goes to your family. It helps buy food, pay your mortgage. That is the normal definition of what payroll would be if you include, again, definitionally, in payroll, net earnings from self-employment. So it is my expectation from a practical standpoint that these PPP loans for 1099 people will be forgiven.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sarah, you also had a comment to make about taking on debt with the future so hard to predict.
Right, and I think it actually applies to this question as well. We have heard, and we've had a lot of clients so concerned about that forgiveness calculation, how that was going to be. I think it's really important to think about the fact that even if it isn't forgiven 100% for whatever reason, the loan could still be a good business decision. It's a 1% loan over 2 years with a 6-month deferral of payment. So even if, I mean, obviously we want to get clarity, we want to try to get as much of it forgiven as possible, there's still some great business reasons to go ahead with it regardless.
Excellent, thank you. Neil, quick questions here about who is eligible and how you would be eligible for various programs. Someone runs a small nonprofit. I think they're in, right? Any guidance for them?
Nonprofits, if they're a 501c3, it's important that you be under the C3 category. Fewer than 500, you're in.
Excellent. And another one, if I am self-employed with a trade and I am a partner with my wife on a small business, so they've got their own income and small business income, can I apply for my trade business and also with our small business? They're two different businesses. Sarah, you're nodding. Yes. How does it work?
Sorry about that. Right, so there are different disclosures when you're filling out the application that you definitely have to say whether you have ownership in other organizations. But if they're separate and they have separate payroll, separate things, our understanding is yes, you can apply with both organizations.
Great. And Neil, a popular question that we actually have not had yet on this particular town hall, but I'm sure you've heard it many times. Can you provide clarity on the Paycheck Protection Program loan forgiveness calculation? What do you have to do to get that thing forgiven?
Yeah, this is a great question, and sadly, Congress didn't make it easy to understand. So the way I like to describe it is you got to think about two tests that you have to pass. The first test is how much are you at maximum eligible for loan forgiveness? And that test is pretty simple. It starts the 8 weeks after that loan is originated. And at 8 weeks after that loan is originated, you need to keep super track of everything that you spend on payroll, the same calculation you used to get the loan. You're going to want to keep track of your interest on the debt that you're paying, your utilities, and any rent for your business. You tally all of that up, and that is your maximum amount of loan forgiveness, but at least 75% of it has to be allocated to payroll. So now we know your maximum amount of loan forgiveness. Now Congress is going to make you pass a second test, and they're going to say, what happened to your employee headcount? And if your employee headcount has been brought down relative to, think about it this way, basically for most employers pre-February 15th, then you can lose a proportional amount of your loan forgiveness. On the same token, if you've reduced the employees that you do have, you've reduced their pay by more than 25%, you're going to lose some of that loan forgiveness. But there's another however. If you've already let some of those employees go and you bring them back or you restore their wages and you're maintaining that through June 30th, then they will disregard the reduction in your employee headcount and disregard that initial reduction in pay. So just think about their logic here. Their logic was, we want you paying your employees, we want you keeping them on the payroll through June 30th at their normal rates of pay, and if you do all that, we'll forgive this loan. We know that some of you have already let people go, so as long as you bring them back, we'll say all is forgiven and you can get that loan forgiveness. Those are the two tests.
Excellent. This is another question that we've had before, but I do want to ask it because of the odd status of the EIDL loan right now. This person says, I'm reading conflicting information that you can do both the EIDL and the Paycheck Protection Program as long as you don't use the EIDL for payroll, which I believe that's correct. Can you clarify this?
That's right. And by the way, if you've already got an EIDL loan, you can roll that over into your PPP loan, which you will want to do for payroll. Very simple rule to just always keep in mind. You can't get $2 from two different sources for the same dollar of expense. So don't go borrow money from payroll for PPP and the EIDL program. If you're going to do both, use EIDL for capital expenses or other things, use PPP for payroll.
Great. Another one, maybe Sarah can start with this one. How does the payment for utilities and health insurance work for 1099s that work from home?
So I think Keith mentioned this actually earlier as well. So on the Schedule C, if they're looking at their net income or their net employment income, much of the utilities is included in that net number. So again, if you go back and you look at a template or a Schedule C, if you haven't really investigated it, I'm an accountant, so of course we like to look at those things, but just look at itemizing what is included on that schedule. Keith, would you agree? Do you have anything else to add?
I totally agree. And I think, and Neil, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this as well, but you can have that payroll amount. And remember, the definition of payroll for a 1099 worker is the net earnings from self-employment, which is the bottom line on that Schedule C. But then you can also have up to 25% more for other type of expenses, employee benefits, including health insurance and those type of things. So in the rough example of $100,000 1099 net earnings from self-employment, you're going to have a little over $15,000 in the calculation, right close to 20. You can then have up to 25,000 if you have those other type of expenses. And so now when it's time to do this forgiveness thing, as Neil mentioned, as long as at least 75% of that money went to cover your payroll, or defined as net earnings from self-employment, then it's all going to be forgiven as well.
Great, thank you. Sarah, we have a question, and we've seen a number of these about people whose businesses actually really ramped up or expanded at the end of 2019. So this person says, we had a significant expansion of our business in the fourth quarter of 2019. We tripled the number of full-time equivalents on our payroll. What can they do when they sort of benchmark their payroll costs to figure out what they're eligible for and what they'll be expected to spend in order to maintain that forgiveness?
Well, the forgiveness shouldn't be a problem because their actual payroll is probably going to be higher than what their estimate was anyway, because it's taking the last year's average. So what they can do, and they probably have at least 6 months of the ramped up progress, I would think, because the Act actually states it's from April to March. It doesn't have to be the calendar year. So I would definitely recommend they use the average from April of 2019 through March of 2020. So in effect, at least that 6 months to get them up a little bit higher on the payroll side. Again, when you're calculating the maximum loan amount rather. And then again, on the forgiveness side, since the requirement is you use 75%, if their actual payroll costs are higher than their average anyway, I don't think they'll have any problem there.
Okay, great. Another one for you, Sarah, about sole proprietors who started a business in January of 2020. Are those entrepreneurs eligible for any of these programs if they paid out of pocket to start a business, but they don't have revenue yet?
Yeah, absolutely. So for newer businesses, again, most of the Act says you have to be in business February 15th. So that being January 2nd is before that. There are some differences in how you calculate that because obviously they don't have a full year of average salaries or average payroll and expenses to calculate. So there's some different calculators out there, I believe on the SBA website as well as with your lender.
Yeah. We had a really important question here. Thank you for that guidance, Sarah, about scams, because that is something that we are starting to see pop up as people apply or are encouraged to apply online. So any advice for screening fintech online lenders for scammers or people who are just fishing for your personal information? Anyone welcome to chime in here? Maybe start with you, Neil, and Sarah. I saw you nod. Hopefully Bridget and Keith can chime in too.
Well, great question. I think a first rule of thumb is you should be the one reaching out to lenders or institutions, and particularly if you're talking about banks, et cetera. If folks are coming to find you, I would be a little bit, in fact, I'd be real.
Oh, I lost Neil.
I'd be happy to jump in, Kimberly.
Oh, I'm sorry. I lost Neil and I could not tell if it was just me. Thank you, whoever that was.
Worries. So this is Bridget from SCORE. And I'm sure once we get Neil on the line, he will have wonderful things to say. But just some tips. Never give your personal financial information to anyone who reaches out to you. Like Neil was saying, you should be the one who's proactively reaching out and verifying that the person you are speaking with is the person that you want to be giving this information to. If someone says they can get you a loan faster for a fee, I would be really leery of those. Business, under this act, there shouldn't be any related fees other than the interest rates. So be really careful about that. Don't work with unknown lenders, and really don't buy into that fast money promise. Trust the process. I know there have been kinks, but those are some things to really look out for because there are scams out there. So be careful. And if you're not sure, check with someone else. Again, your chamber, your resource partners like SCORE, the small business development centers, or the women's business centers. We can help you verify what's valid and what's not.
Great. That is great advice. Keith, anything additional there, or we got it covered in terms of the scams?
I think that's a great place. And it hurts my heart that those are out there, but we knew they would be there. It's always a good idea to do another check. So even if you've reached out to someone that you're working with online, not a bad idea to Google them, ask them for another reference. Is there someone else, some other small business that they've already worked for? That's probably the same advice, even picking somebody to work on your plumbing at home. It's always a good idea to check another reference.
Right. Sarah, anything additional?
Yep, I completely agree. And I think there's a lot of online communities through the chambers of commerce, whether it's your local, state, or obviously the U.S. chamber, that you can just chat with different members to say, throw it out there. Have you heard of this lender? Any experience with them?
I'm going to just give us one more question. We're almost out of time. I know that we started late, and I just want to clarify that's because it takes a few minutes for everyone to get into the meeting as people sign up. So we're going to just have a couple more things here. One question for Sarah, is the forgivable portion of the Paycheck Protection Program loan considered income for tax purposes, particularly for pass-through organizations?
No is the answer to that. It will be non-taxable.
Okay, that is excellent. Thank you.
And I believe all states have passed that as well. So in Michigan, definitely they've confirmed at the state level, federal level, it's not taxable. That's right in the act. But I believe all states have said that as well. Okay.
And another one, this will be our last one. It comes from a gym owner, but we've had similar questions at Inc. from any number of small businesses. They're required to stay closed right now. So they don't want their 8 weeks on the Paycheck Protection Program to start until they're allowed to open up and they actually need their staff. If I get approval for a Paycheck Protection Program loan, can I delay the date of the start until they actually are able to open their business? Sarah, is that possible?
I don't believe they can delay the start because it does say it has to be with the 8 weeks. But one thing I do think you can consider or should consider, one of the reasons for the whole Paycheck Protection Program is to bring people back. And we see a lot of companies that they're paying them to not do the same thing or almost not do anything that they used to do. So I do think there's going to be scrutiny, of course, when people are looking at forgiveness. But if you're bringing employees back to keep them out of the unemployment system and keep your labor force intact, that is still forgivable, even if your business isn't open.
Great. Thank you so very much. That is going to have to be our last question. I want to thank everyone on the line. I want to thank first Neil Bradley, of course, and the great team at the U.S. Chambers of Commerce, all my colleagues at Inc. who've worked to make these town halls possible in partnership with the chambers, and of course our panelists, Sarah Jennings, Tanya Mata, Bridget Weston, and Keith Hall. Thank you very much. We will be continuing to follow these issues closely at Inc.com, so please check there for more updates and coverage. As always, it's a pleasure for all of us at Inc. to do everything we can to support small businesses. Thank you for spending an hour with us. I hope it was helpful to you. I hope you all stay healthy and enjoy your weekends. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.